This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
I've got a really interesting collection of articles and research all about social media algorithms and data privacy.
Yeah, it seems like it's something everyone's talking about these days, but
It can be hard to really get what's going on behind the scenes, right?
definitely.
So we're going to do a deep dive into all those systems that basically shape our experiences online.
It's fascinating to think about how these algorithms, they're just these complex lines of code,
Right.
but they actually determine what we see online, how we see it, and I think ultimately they shape how we view the online world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not just about seeing our friends' updates anymore. It's more about what does the algorithm think we want to see?
Exactly.
And that's what takes us down this rabbit hole of personalization and maybe potential manipulation,
Yeah, and these algorithms are constantly learning about us too, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're analyzing everything, like how long we spend looking at a post, the links we click, even how fast we scroll. It's almost like they're putting together this super detailed digital file on each of us.
So it's not just the basic stuff like where we live or our age. It's it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's more about understanding our behavior, our preferences, and then ultimately trying to predict how we'll react to different content. And it's this whole thing that leads to, those two concepts you hear about all the time, echo chambers and filter bubbles.
Yeah.
Where basically we're just seeing information that supports what we already believe. And that can really limit how we understand different perspectives.
It's like you're in this feedback loop where you're constantly just being fed information that validates your opinions you already have.
Exactly.
Which, that can't be good for thinking critically or just being open-minded.
No, it's not good at all. Because if all we see are things we already agree with, we miss out on, other viewpoints. And that can actually make our biases even stronger.
Yeah.
And that's a problem not just for each of us individually, but for how we talk to each other as a society.
That makes me think of that study I read where they found that when people on social media were exposed to different opinions, it actually made them less polarized.
Interesting.
So it seems like these algorithms are kind of working against that.
Yeah, exactly. It just shows that tension that exists between wanting personalized content and also needing to see different points of view.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got these algorithms that are always watching what we do and then feeding us content based on that. But what about all that data they're gathering? Does anyone really get how it's being used?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
Platforms say they use it to, personalize our experience, but it goes so much deeper than that. It's they're analyzing our every move online, every website, every product, every single interaction.
Yeah.
And they use that to create these really, really detailed user profiles.
It's kind of like those digital footprints we leave, or more I don't know, digital dossiers or something.
Exactly.
It's a little creepy to think about,
Yeah.
All that data could be used for targeted advertising or even sold to other companies.
Yeah, that's the concern a lot of people have. Do users really have control over their own data?
Mhm.
And is all this personalized content really worth, potentially giving up our privacy?
That's a tough one. I love it when I get recommendations for things I actually am interested in.
Right.
But it does feel kind of weird knowing that these companies are tracking my every move online.
Yeah. So it's how do we balance these two things? And that's at the heart of the whole debate about data privacy. Some people think we need much stricter rules,
Okay.
but others say that would stifle innovation. So it's tricky. Finding that sweet spot between keeping things personal and protecting our privacy, that's really hard.
It definitely feels like we're at a crossroads. We've got these amazingly powerful technologies that are shaping what we see online.
Uh-huh.
But we're still trying to figure out what that means ethically, for society. It's a lot to think about.
We're really just scratching the surface here, but I think now that we have a better idea of how these algorithms actually work,
Right.
maybe we can dig into some of the ethical issues they create. And the first one that comes to mind is this whole concept of a digital footprint.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. It's almost like every little thing we do online, every comment, every article we share, it all becomes part of this permanent record of who we are.
And it's not even just about the things we do on purpose. It's also about the passive data collection that's happening in the background. Our location, our browsing history, even how we interact with certain apps, all of that is being tracked and analyzed.
It's starting to sound like those sci-fi movies where everyone's being watched all the time. This constant data collection just feels, I don't know, unsettling. Are there any historical parallels that can help us understand what this all means?
That's a really interesting question. You could argue that data has been collected and analyzed for centuries,
Right.
but the sheer scale and sophistication of how it's happening in the digital age, that's something totally new.
And the potential consequences are bigger too, right? I mean, think about it. Potential employers, future partners, even insurance companies could access all of this information about us
Exactly.
and make judgments based on our online behavior.
You're right to be concerned. I mean, this brings up some fundamental questions about privacy and, just being in control of our own lives in this digital age.
Okay, so we have these digital footprints,
Right.
and they're used to build these super detailed profiles about each of us. And those profiles are used to, target us with ads. That's where the whole making money off data thing comes in, right?
You got it. Companies are making billions of dollars by selling our data to advertisers who want to show us personalized ads. It's a huge business, but it definitely raises ethical questions about who's really benefiting from all of our online activity.
I do get the privacy concerns, but don't these personalized recommendations have some value too?
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure there are people who actually like seeing ads for things that they're interested
Oh,
in.
yeah, that's a good point. It's this whole push and pull between convenience and, getting things that we actually want versus the potential cost to our privacy.
Yeah.
Finding that balance, that's the key.
Speaking of companies making money from our data, there's another area where algorithms are kind of controversial, and that's content moderation. I was reading about how AI is being used now to find and remove harmful content like, hate speech and misinformation.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Right. Yeah.
Because on one hand, AI can be really helpful in fighting those things,
Yeah.
It can help platforms identify and take down stuff that violates their rules, and it can do it way more efficiently than human moderators could.
Right.
But then there's also the risk of what we call algorithmic bias,
Yeah.
where certain types of content might be flagged or removed unfairly.
So it's like we're basically outsourcing our ethical decisions to these algorithms.
Yeah.
And that opens up a whole can of worms about who's actually responsible for the content that we see online.
And it's not always clear-cut either, What one person thinks is harmful, another person might see as totally fine. It's really complicated to create algorithms that can make those kinds of judgments.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's a lot to think about for sure.
Yeah.
It's like we're entering this new world where algorithms are making decisions that have real consequences in our lives.
Yeah.
But we're still figuring out how to make sure those decisions are fair and ethical and that someone is accountable.
Exactly. And that's where all this debate about making algorithms more transparent and having regulations for them becomes really important.
So are there things being done to address these concerns?
Yeah, there are lots of different approaches being explored. Some people are really pushing for stronger regulations. They want tech companies to be more transparent and to have limits on how they can collect and use our data. But then other people argue that too much regulation could stifle innovation, and limit the good things that can come from these technologies.
Right.
It's going to be a constant challenge to find the right balance there.
Yeah, because it's constantly changing, right?
Yeah.
As technology evolves, our understanding of all of this stuff has to evolve too.
Exactly.
This is all super fascinating.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it's a lot to take in. Can we maybe shift gears a little bit and talk about how these algorithms are affecting our mental health?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably one of the most important and concerning aspects of this whole conversation.
From what I've been reading, it seems like these platforms are almost designed to be addictive. With the endless scrolling, the notifications, and that constant need for likes and shares.
Yeah, I mean, these algorithms are literally built to keep us engaged. And they often do that by tapping into our psychological vulnerabilities. That constant flow of curated content can actually fuel feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, and depression, especially for young people whose brains are still developing.
Yeah. It's like we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, judging our own lives and achievements based on those carefully crafted images and stories that we see in our feeds. It's no wonder so many people are feeling anxious and depressed.
It's not even just the content itself, you know?
Right.
It's the whole design of these platforms, the notifications, the likes, the shares, all of that triggers these dopamine releases in our brains,
Uh-huh.
which creates this cycle of reward and reinforcement that can be really hard to break.
It's almost like a digital slot machine where you just keep pulling the lever hoping for that next hit of validation.
Exactly. And the more time we spend on these platforms, the more data they collect about us, which they then use to further personalize our feeds and keep us hooked. It's a vicious cycle.
And it can have really serious consequences for our mental health, right? I mean, there were studies showing a link between spending too much time on social media and higher rates of anxiety, depression, body image issues, and even suicidal thoughts.
It's scary to think about the impact this is having, especially on younger people.
So what can we do about it? I mean, these platforms aren't going anywhere, and they're only getting better at grabbing our attention and influencing how we behave.
You're right. It's a really complex problem. But there are things we can do, both as individuals and as a society. Personally, we can be more mindful of how much time we're spending on social media.
Okay.
Set limits, turn off those notifications, curate our feeds to include more positive and uplifting content, and just make an effort to do things that make us happy offline.
So it's about finding that balance again, right? Remembering that social media is just one part of our lives and that our mental and emotional well-being should come first.
Exactly. And as a society, we need to be talking more about these issues. We need to be teaching young people about the potential downsides of spending too much time online, promoting digital literacy and critical thinking skills. And we need to be pushing for policies that prioritize user privacy and mental health.
We also need to hold these tech companies responsible for how they design their platforms and the impact that they have on our lives, right? Like, demand more transparency, push for regulations that protect our data and privacy, and support organizations that are working to make technology more ethical.
Absolutely. It's about taking back some control in the digital world. We're not just passive consumers. We have a voice, and we can use it to shape the kind of online world we want to live in.
So I think the big takeaway from this deep dive into social media algorithms and data privacy is knowledge is power. The more we understand about how these technologies work, how they influence our behavior, and what we can do to protect ourselves, the more empowered we become to make good choices and create a digital future that works for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. It's about being informed, engaged, and empowered digital citizens. It's about taking control, setting healthy boundaries, and fighting for a digital world that values well-being, connection, and authenticity. And it's not just about us as individuals, right? This also impacts society as a whole.
Oh, totally.
These algorithms, they're shaping our shared reality.
Right.
They're affecting everything. How we get our news, how we talk about politics, even how we understand the world around us.
That's a really good point. It's like we're giving these algorithms control over our collective consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
And that makes you wonder, what kind of society are we building in this digital age?
That's the question. Do we want a society where algorithms just drive us further apart, you know, and reinforce those power structures that already exist?
Right.
Or do we want a society where tech helps us understand each other better, builds empathy and connection?
I mean, we've already seen how these algorithms can spread misinformation and create all this division.
Yeah.
It's like the whole thing about stuff going viral, it seems like algorithms are designed to push content that will spread really fast, regardless of whether it's true or even helpful. It's like we're bombarded with these clickbait headlines and sensationalized stories.
Right.
They're designed to grab our attention, but then they don't really have any substance.
That's the attention economy in action.
Right.
Platforms are rewarded for promoting content that keeps people engaged. And that often means stuff that's really emotionally charged or provocative. And that can be used by people who are trying to manipulate public opinion.
It's kind of depressing when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
These algorithms, they were supposed to help us connect and share information,
Yeah.
but they can also be used to spread lies and turn people against each other.
It just goes to show that technology, it's a double-edged sword. It has so much potential for good, but it can also cause a lot of harm.
Right.
It all comes down to how we choose to use it, how we design it to reflect our values.
Okay, so speaking of design, one thing that I found really interesting was this idea of algorithmic bias. It's not like these algorithms are intentionally trying to be unfair,
Right.
but they can accidentally reinforce biases that already exist in the data they're using,
That's a really important point. If the data used to train these algorithms, reflects those societal biases, whether it's about gender, race, or, socioeconomic status. Those biases can get amplified online.
And it's not just the data itself, right? It's also about the people who are actually designing these algorithms
yeah.
and what their values are.
Yeah,
There's this growing understanding that we need more diversity in the tech industry
definitely.
to make sure that these technologies are developed in a responsible and fair way.
Absolutely. Diversity is crucial, both in terms of who's building these things and whose perspectives are being represented in the data. We have to be very aware of the potential for algorithmic bias and work to minimize it through careful design and constant monitoring.
So it sounds like we need a multi-pronged approach, right? We need to be aware of our own biases.
Yes,
We need to demand transparency from the tech companies,
absolutely.
and we need to advocate for more diversity in the tech industry itself.
You got it. It's about recognizing that these algorithms aren't neutral. They're shaped by the data they're given and the people who build them.
This is all starting to feel a little overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like we're up against this huge, complex system.
It's massive.
And it's hard to even know where to start to address all of these challenges.
I get that. It can definitely feel daunting. But, one thing that I did find kind of encouraging while I was going through all this research was just seeing how much more aware people are becoming about all these issues.
Oh, that's good.
People are starting to ask questions, they're demanding more transparency, they're even trying out alternative platforms that focus on privacy and ethics.
That's a good sign.
Yeah,
Hopefully, this growing awareness will lead to more people pushing for change
I hope so.
from both the tech companies and from, policymakers.
I think it will. I really do. Ultimately, the power lies with the users. If we demand better from those companies, if we make smart choices about how we engage with these platforms, and if we support those groups who are working for a more ethical and just digital world, then maybe we can actually steer these technologies in a better direction.
It's like we need a digital literacy movement
Yeah.
where we all learn the skills to navigate this online world safely and critically and ethically.
That's a great way to put it.
We need to understand how these algorithms work, how our data is being used, and how to protect ourselves from manipulation.
It's about becoming responsible digital citizens, thinking critically about what we're consuming, and using our voices to advocate for a digital future that reflects our values.
Okay, so we need to be more aware, more critical, and more engaged.
Yes.
But what about concrete actions?
Mm-hmm.
What are some specific steps that we can take to protect our privacy, limit our data exposure, and just be more savvy in this digital age?
That's a great question. And honestly, we could probably do a whole other deep dive just on that. But for now, let's just hit on a few key takeaways.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So first of all, be mindful of what you share online. Check your privacy settings on your social media and other websites. Be careful about what you post. And think about, who might see it and how long that digital footprint is going to last.
So it's not just about what we share publicly.
No.
It's about being aware of the data that's being collected behind the scenes, too.
Exactly. Second, get your information from different places. Don't just rely on social media for news. Check out reputable news organizations and fact-checking sites.
I like that. It's like we need to be more proactive about choosing what information we consume instead of letting the algorithms choose for us.
You got it. And third, support those organizations that are fighting for stronger data protection laws and pushing for ethical technology development. There are a lot of great groups doing amazing work in this area, and they need our help.
It's good to remember that we're not alone in this. There are people and organizations out there that are trying to build a better digital future.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's about remembering that we have power.
Right.
We're not helpless against these technologies. We can make choices, we can speak up, and we can demand better.
That's a really empowering message. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but it's important to remember that we have a role to play in shaping the digital world we want to live in.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot,
Right.
from how social media algorithms actually work to the implications for our privacy, our mental health, and even democracy itself.
We've looked at both the good and the bad that can come from these powerful technologies. And I think we've highlighted just how important it is to be aware, to think critically, and to engage in navigating this really complex digital landscape.
Yeah. And maybe, just maybe, by understanding these algorithms and talking about these issues, we can start to take back some control and guide these technologies in a direction that benefits everyone.
Well said. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the downsides of all these algorithms, privacy stuff, misinformation, and how they can kind of manipulate us. But we should probably talk about the good stuff too, right? I mean, these platforms do offer some real benefit.
Oh, for sure. Social media can be amazing for connecting with people, building communities, and even activism.
Yeah.
It can help us keep in touch with people we care about, find new ideas, and even get involved in causes we believe in.
I know. I've definitely experienced that. I've reconnected with old friends, found new authors I like, even heard about local events all through social media.
It's really about remembering that these technologies are tools. And just like any tool, they can be used in good ways or bad ways. It's up to us to, be smart about how we use them and be aware of the potential problems.
So it's not about ditching social media altogether. It's about being more conscious and intentional about how we use it.
Exactly. And I think that starts with really getting how these algorithms work, how they're designed to keep us hooked, and how they can sometimes take advantage of our weaknesses.
We talked about some strategies for dealing with those risks, like setting limits on our screen time, being careful about what's in our feeds, and getting our information from different places. But I'm curious, in your research, did you come across any other tools or techniques that can help us navigate all of this more effectively?
One thing I've found helpful is to be more intentional about how I use social media. So instead of just mindlessly scrolling, I try to be more active and deliberate. If I'm looking for info on something specific, I'll search using keywords or hashtags.
Oh.
And I'm way more picky about who I follow and what kind of content I actually interact with.
So it's more about taking charge, not just letting the algorithm decide what we see.
Right. It also helps to pay attention to how you're feeling when you're on social media. If you're stressed or down, it's probably not the best time to be scrolling through your feed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, social media can be fun and a way to connect, but it can also trigger negative feelings.
Definitely. And if you catch yourself comparing yourself to others or feeling like you're not good enough, that's a sign you might need a break, or maybe you need to change how you're using it.
So basically, it all comes back to balance, right?
Yep.
Be aware of the risks, take steps to protect yourself, and remember that social media is just one part of our lives.
Exactly. It's about making sure our digital experience is something that supports our well-being, not something that takes away from it.
But I think that's a great note to leave our listeners on. And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into social media algorithms and data privacy. Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery.
It's been my pleasure diving deep with you. And remember, stay curious, stay critical, and stay informed. The digital world's always changing, and it's up to us to make sure it reflects our values.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.